welcome. So today we're going to be talking about this book, How Big Things Get Done by Bent Flyvbjerg and Dan Gardner. The full title is How Big Things Get Done, The Surprising Factors Behind Every Successful Project, from Home Renovations to Space Exploration. So it's a book about program management of mainly very large programs and projects, mega projects, in addition to smaller projects, and provides a lot of advice into how to successfully get them done from learning from a lot of problems in the past. It's a book of about 300 pages long. There's an awful lot of citations and references and notes at the back, which are very, very helpful. So while books like this can seem potentially some of them are written at a more surface level, this is a very, very well referenced one and built on a large academic career that Flyvbjerg has engaged in at the University of Oxford and in Copenhagen and various other institutions around the world. So released in 2023, so now it's 2024, so it's 1 year old, so it's quite, it's newish. There are a few projects that we know about in the news of today that are still ongoing that are called out in the book, which is very, very interesting. So Bent Flyvbjerg is a professor of major project management at the University of Oxford at Side Business School and fellow at St Anne's College. So that's business school rather than engineering school. I did my undergraduate at the Department of Engineering Science at the University of Oxford. So Side Business School is on the other side of town, and it's interesting to see how different fields of study can attack and help those in developing big systems, big infrastructure systems like this, which will be very interesting and provide different ways of achieving the same thing. Because we know that these big projects, these big systems projects, require the expertise of lots and lots of different collaborators and contributors. And so it's for me it's very interesting to see how a more economics, business, social science approach can come to bear and improve these projects, which I think we all intuitively know perhaps eventually come to fruition, but they're often much later than promised and cost a lot more than promised, and often have to have their scope reduced to get them in a budget that is acceptable for society. So as I mentioned, Flyvbjerg is a professor at Oxford. He's also a professor at the IT University in Copenhagen in his native Denmark. Economic geographer by training, that's where his PhD was in. And he's in the top 2% most cited scholars in the world in any subject. And of his subject of project and program management, he is the most highly cited scholar. The research is in behavioral science, specifically power, biases, strategic misrepresentation, uniqueness bias, optimism bias, the planning fallacy, and reference class forecasting. And the book talks a lot about the benefits of reference class forecasting and where it came from and how they developed it, and how you could do that for your own projects. And it seems very powerful. He's collaborated with Daniel Kahneman, who also comes up in the book. You may know Kahneman as the Nobel Prize winner for economics, mainly in psychology. And he's referred to Flyvbjerg's work on planning fallacy and reference class forecasting as the single most important piece of advice regarding how to increase the accuracy in forecasting. In some of Flyvbjerg's other work in philosophy and social science, so he's got a whole load of writings and books on that and how to do social science better, and on the topic of Phronesis, which is an ancient Greek word used by Aristotle for the meaning of wisdom and intelligence concerned with practical action, which is important with the sort of mega projects described in the book, and how master builders and people who can really deliver these projects and teams that can deliver these projects, they are essentially acting in the world to have high phronesis. As I said, this isn't coming out of engineering school. This is business school, social science, economics, and the book is sort of highly well regarded. Nassim Taleb, famous for Black Swan. He's on the back cover and has collaborated with Flyvbjerg's research team at Oxford. Just to quote him, nobody has studied the topic more broadly and deeply as Bent Flyvbjerg. His focus ranges from Olympic Games to the renovation of your doghouse. And Olympic Games to feature a fair amount in here, which has very interesting mega projects that need to be done. I think my printer is making a lot of noise right now. Praise for the book. So it was given Book of the Year by The Economist and the Financial Times and Forbes in 2023, which is great to be there. We mentioned about the book is accessible to a wide variety of audiences, not simply sort of the academic one. And I think it does straddle a space where it is rigorous, it is built on high quality research, but at the same time is accessible. Sort of other books, which are, we can perhaps another time go into more detail, but these are other books from Flyvbjerg, so Mega Projects and Risk, which is, these are more for an academic focused crowd. This one is, the Oxford Handbook of Mega Project Management. This is a compilation of many authors, but with Flyvbjerg being the lead editor and thus name on the cover. We won't look at these for now. And then there's the other books on how to do social science and sort of problems with social science and how to improve things. But we'll stick to how big things get done. And then the other author, Dan Gardner, is an author of other books on psychology and decision making, and I think is sort of bringing a ability to make such research as Flyvbjerg is more accessible to an audience outside of that specialized in program mega project development. And so while it is built on a lot of academic research, additionally there's a lot of consulting work in Flyvbjerg's career that has also been fed into the advice that is given. So while something might work sort of abstractly, he's sort of put it to the test working with British prime ministers, particularly Gordon Brown is listed, the US government, various Fortune 500 companies, and then for McKinsey. And then there is a company where you can engage with Flyvbjerg, so Oxford Global Projects, and I'll put a link in the description for all these various ways to engage. So it's a very interesting book, and I'll drill into the details now. There'll be a link below as well for my notes that you can get hold of, and subscribe to the newsletter and the various things. You'll see them down below, and you can go on www.joshuasutherland.com, and you can always find more resources and great things there. Okay, so I was sort of thinking about what the foundations of the book are, and the research that has been done to pull it together, and really the bedrock is a database that Flyvbjerg has built up with his colleagues over decades, database of projects. 16,000 entries so far. Sounds like it's growing. Ranging from nuclear storage, Olympic Games, IT projects, defense projects, ports, mining, hospitals, solar power, nuclear power, airports, roads. So essentially our built infrastructure and IT projects. I think those are the key things I'm seeing. And defense, that's going to include, and aerospace, buildings. So sort of those entities that do sit essentially by themselves, so that they aren't sort of part of the wider landscape. And so these projects, these programs have been fed into a database, and then off of that, various statistics can be found regarding these class of projects, and that can be then used to drive the decision making for new projects, and also predict and forecast how what their expense is going to be, and provide forecasts that are much more realistic. And so there is a table towards the back of the book in the appendix. I'll just find that. So yeah, this table, it's very small writing, you probably won't be able to read that, but essentially by project type, so each row is a project type, be it nuclear storage or the Olympic Games, or nuclear power, hydroelectric power, IT. So these different types of projects. It's then got 3 columns next to them. The first column being the mean cost overrun. Then the second one being the percentage of projects in the tail, which is defined as projects with a greater than 50% overrun. And then column C, the final column, the mean overrun of the projects in the tail. So key takeaways from the table, and then likely the key takeaways from the overall book, essentially, and the database, is one of the mean cost overrun can be very high. Nuclear storage is at over 200%. So that's the mean overrun. So if you were doing a nuclear storage project, you can expect to go overrun by a lot. And then of the projects that go overrun, many end up in what he defines as this fat tail of very, very large overruns. So in that nuclear storage case, it's looking like 48% of projects are in a tail of a over 50% overrun. And then of those that are in that over 50% overrun, the average overrun for those nuclear storage projects is 227%. So that's phenomenal overrun if you think about it. So this table, I think on a very basic level, you could use to look at your type of project, see where which type of project it would be most likely classed into, and see what would be, if we just follow the pattern that's been detected through these 16,000 other ones, where might we likely fall. And this is so actually applying the reference class forecasting that Flyvbjerg developed and has applied to other projects into the future. So very, very helpful table. And that's really the bedrock of the research as I see it, as an outsider. It then provides a series of heuristics that can be used by those engaged in projects to essentially set things up for success, or at least lower the chance of failure. Sometimes it's easy to be a bit skeptical of heuristics and rules of thumb, like I often are, because it's kind of, where are they based from? Are they actually will they actually lead to better performance, or are they potentially sort of things that we think help but are actually unrelated, or might even hinder? But I think given that the level of rigorous research that's been done upon 16,000 projects and using a rigorous approach, I think we can be fairly confident that these are at least more likely to help, as opposed to sort of other cookbook lists that haven't had that level of rigor. So he lists 11. I've got 11 written down here, so we'll go through each of them. Just on his definition of what a heuristic even is, heuristics are fast and frugal rules of thumb used to simplify complex decisions. So fast and frugal, so quick to use and not overly extensive rules of thumb to simplify complex decisions. So number one, hire a master builder. And that word, so master builders, come from the names of the people who were creating the massive cathedrals in medieval times in Europe. And if you haven't sort of traveled to Europe in a while, from there, if you think that these vast stone buildings which were very challenging to build, even today, but with technologies back then that were much more limited, you required these master builders who would actually build them and they would stand up, were highly skilled people. And so Flyvbjerg is saying that the same thing applies today. And this term Phronesis, which we mentioned before, that the master builder possesses it. So he's got the wisdom or intelligence concerned with practical action, and he can make the project happen. And embedded into that is make the project happen successfully. So that means the cost is acceptable to society, the benefits are realized, and it's on a time scale that's also acceptable. And he mentions that first heuristic is really kind of like the most important one. So you're hiring a person who really can get this thing done, and that's from a track record of having done previous ones, maybe not the same scale, but has been building up to in size and is obtaining the experience. Number two, heuristic number two, get your team right. And this, Flyvbjerg mentions, it's the only heuristic that every project leader he's met has explained to him. So again, it's incredibly important. So hire the master builder and get them the right team. So I think we can consider those two to be the two most important for success that Flyvbjerg has identified. And then at number three, ask why. So what he means by this is a lot of projects and programs race to a solution that is suboptimal because essentially no one has really questioned what is the purpose of the project, and there might be or are likely better solutions that can deliver for clients and society than what has occurred by just sort of racing into it. And so he describes this as essentially, if you think of a Gantt chart or some sort of timeline, some sort of roadmap, thinking about that right-hand side and really exploring what is the purpose and what does sort of success look like outside of racing to the solution. And so I think an example he gives would be if it could be easy to race into building a bridge to connect a community to the mainland. But really, if you drilled into that, it's like, well, what is the purpose of this? Is it the purpose to ensure that people on the island can access the mainland healthcare? Well, if that's the case, like maybe a better solution would be to have rescue helicopters, air ambulances that could be deployed from the mainland to the island, and you don't need the bridge. Or maybe you could build a hospital on the island, maybe that isn't even the purpose. Maybe the purpose is to enable people to work from the small island to the main the mainland, and maybe for that it'd be better to have like a fast internet connection. And he, throughout the book, there's various examples that get into where that has sort of gone wrong and also gone well, particularly with architects like Frank Gehry, who famously designed the art museum, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, and Frank Gehry's approach of really getting into the why the government of the region of Spain in charge of the city of Bilbao, what was the purpose of that? And well, if you know, northern Spain, it had big economic challenges as industry moved out, and Gehry was asked to redevelop a disused warehouse and turn it into a Guggenheim museum. And when he arrived, he said, well, if the purpose, as he elicited from the discussions with the clients, if the purpose was to put Bilbao on the map and make it a place where people would travel to, then building a landmark museum or landmark building that would be famous, a bit like something like build the Sydney Opera House or the Empire State Building, this type of building that becomes the signature for the entire city. His view was that would be that would deliver them what they were after, which was to put the city on the map and make tourists go there, rather than redeveloping an existing site that would not have that architectural note. Okay, so that was number 3, ask why of these heuristics. Number 4, build with Lego. So this is using Lego as a proxy for highly modular and scalable solutions. So with Lego, we know that you can construct large structures. So with Lego, you could build a model of an aircraft or a building, and he's found that the risk of big overruns is significantly less with modular technologies, be it solar panels, wind turbines, server farms, these sorts of technologies. Like we think about building a solar power plant versus, say, a nuclear power plant, a traditional nuclear power plant. With a solar power plant, we can essentially install one panel and we're immediately generating electricity. And if we want to generate more electricity, we essentially install more panels, and we can just kind of do that until we fill up a whole desert. With a nuclear power station, with one reactor, essentially, until the entire facility is built and is safe, we can then start to generate power off of that one reactor. But it requires that entire very, very complicated system, highly integrated system, to all be functioning together. And he's found that projects that are highly modular essentially have lower risk and are delivered generally on time and on budget when compared to these massively integrated single sort of entity systems like the nuclear power station. Number 5, think slow, act fast. The projects that have gone massively wrong that he's identified tended to launch far too quickly into the delivery, building, construction phase, and had not spent enough time in the design and planning stage. Of course, there's an importance to sort of discovering of uncertainties, and to do that we do need to experiment. And he talks about how to do that in a safe way. But as an example, the Sydney Opera House, the very famous building that many people know, and if they ever visit Australia, they would often go there. But many people don't realize that the building of that was based on a design competition, but the winner of the competition, a Danish architect, essentially drew a series of sketches, and which were considered very beautiful, and but hadn't got the detailed plans ready or created. But due to very strong political pressures, was the project essentially started going, and part of this was to ensure that the project couldn't be cancelled by a feeling that the cost had already been sunk in and they would keep going. But it was so premature to start that when it was apparent that it wasn't even being built right, they had to dynamite big chunks of it during the construction just to revert back to start again. So the key thing here is that sort of planning is relatively cheap compared to delivery. It's not absolutely cheap. You do have teams of engineers and designers and things like that, but it's much better to be designing slowly, and then then you can actually act and build much quicker. And the purpose of sort of building quickly is, he has a concept of there's a window of delivery. During that period, you can have your black swan events come in and disrupt your entire project. And so, as an example, one of which he talks about would be like the pandemic. So if you were building during that, you then have to shut down because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But if you had delivered in a shorter period, there's less likely that something like that will occur during your delivery period, and thus you have avoided that potential sort of black swan. Take the outside view. So this is heuristic number 6. Essentially, Flyvbjerg contends that no project is special. He says, unless you are doing what has literally not been done before, like building a time machine or a black hole, it's highly unlikely that your project is unique, and therefore you should see it as part of a larger class of projects that you can essentially say your project is one of those classes. I mentioned before at the back, there's in the appendix a nice table where it has essentially various classes of project, which you could classify your own into. He also tells a story about how the Swedish essentially nuclear regulatory authority were trying to figure out how much money to set aside for nuclear decommissioning of Sweden's civilian nuclear reactors. And Flyvbjerg didn't have any data on that at the time. But when sort of talking with the Swedish authorities, they were at least able to, while they couldn't apply specific data to nuclear decommissioning, they could take data from other types of projects and at least say, well, it's likely to be, in the best case scenario, as bad as those, and then there's a whole load of uncertainties and we're dealing with nuclear technology, so it's likely to go up from there, as opposed to what some other consultants did, where they were almost implying that it would be about the same as constructing roads and bridges and things like that. So even if you have something that you think is very, very unique and special, essentially you should assume it isn't, and take data that you have available to you and use that. Heuristic number 7, what's your downside? Risk can kill your project. No upside can compensate for that. this is a sort of thought where, and throughout the book, they weave in examples that are not all from, say, infrastructure. There is some talk about filmmaking, things like that. But if you think about the upside of, for example, building a railway line, it's unlikely that you're going to have some sort of upside that is phenomenally beyond what you think it could have been, i.e. you're moving people from city A to city B, and there's going to be sort of a maximum amount of people who would be able to fit on those trains and go between them. So you can't be sort of predicting this stellar upside equivalent to the blockbuster movie that every single person will attend, because with films you can duplicate them by means of selling DVDs and cinema tickets, which you can't with these infrastructure projects. So really your sort of focus should be on not losing every day, being clear on what that end goal is, but clear that end goal likely can only get smaller as opposed to sort of get bigger, as is possible with things like film and digital, media that can be duplicated. Heuristic number 8, say no and walk away. So I think this is a little bit nod to that sort of a master builder who has this experience will be clear that if he doesn't have the people, the funds, the contingencies needed to succeed, then the project just isn't possible to be done successfully, and you'd be better off walking away until those conditions have been met, so that the project's been set up for success. And likewise, things that can be a distraction and don't contribute to the goal should be skipped and ignored, and things like that. So heuristic number 9, make friends and keep them friendly. This is a thought around you need, and these friends will be cross-organizational to various other stakeholders, things of that nature. You'll need them for when things go wrong, and it'll be too late to make friends with people when things are going wrong. And he talks a lot about Heathrow Airport Terminal 5, which is a very, very large terminal building. If you fly in or out of Heathrow on British Airways, I think you must go through that terminal. And how a lot of problems were solved in the fact that various subcontractors were already had worked with each other before, and were through the nature of the various contracts that they set up, were all incentivized to work together to the good outcome. And when problems came up, they could sort of call up each other and work together and just get a solution in place to deliver the Terminal 5 building, rather than sort of fight with each other. Heuristic number 10, a little bit different than the others. So build climate mitigation into your project. Flyvbjerg mentions that a big motivation for him to write the book was the challenges of climate change, and the challenge of essentially electrifying huge amounts of human infrastructure, such that the dependency on fossil fuels would be reduced or eliminated. And thus, I think he's likely thinking with regard to your big infrastructure, be it tunneling, ports, large skyscrapers, stuff like that. You should likely be aware of sort of sea level change and weather changes and things like that. Otherwise, you could be in big trouble in a few years' time. And then heuristic number 11, know that the biggest risk is you. So with sort of risk registers, risk listing, it's somewhat easy to note down the weather and price changes, interest rate changes, things like that. But on a fair few number of projects that he's been investigating, often the biggest threat is in sort of human heads, be it our own, and sort of particularly behavioral biases, which fits with the fact that this research is mainly in behavioral science, and I've mentioned around Kahneman and those sort of famous psychologists, and so being aware of your own cognitive biases and how to proactively put in place measures to avoid them, and then also collective ones and power and politics and things of that nature. So it's evidently quite outside of sort of typical engineering. Okay, so I've just been taking you through those heuristics. You should read them in more detail because each of them has a good paragraph, but you probably shouldn't just read them in isolation because they are built up upon the actual text throughout, and reading them in isolation and following them blindly is sounds unwise, at least to me. Okay, so in terms of table of contents and chapters, so there's an introduction and then 9 whole chapters, and then the coda with the heuristics, and then a couple of appendices. So yeah, that's what it looks like. So that's we'll just go through a little summary of the table of contents. So so chapter 0, the introduction, California Dreaming. So this chapter opens up with the Californian high-speed rail project. So if you know, there's been when did that start? I don't have the date here, but California has set itself up to build a high-speed railway line between Los Angeles and San Francisco, which if you ever travel there, you'll know there's a lot of traffic between the two, both by road and by air. This railway project, I mean, bluntly, I think you say isn't going very well, in that it's now no longer between Los Angeles and San Francisco. It's now between two much smaller towns or cities in the middle, so they could avoid the challenges of having to build the infrastructure through Los Angeles city and sort of Silicon Valley, San Francisco. So it's likely it's not going to deliver the key benefit of the people needing to move between the two big urban centers. It isn't built. I was in California in January, and I had to go from, I was in a few days in Los Angeles and a few days in San Francisco, and I had to fly because the train line doesn't exist, at least as proposed. So this was a very ambitious project, but it's faltering at the moment, at least we could say that. And he compares it to a project that Flyvbjerg did early in his career, which was with regard to building schools in Nepal, which is clearly very different, but went very well and was completed on time and actually completed on budget and actually ahead of schedule, as opposed to California high-speed rail that is got very big delays, is very expensive, gone well over budget, and has much reduced scope. And then he also talks about the Empire State Building, which was very successful with regard to its implementation, in that it finished ahead of schedule and under budget. And I think he exemplifies this idea of think slow and act fast, and that the Empire State Building was one of the key players in it was an ex General Motors finance guy in the 30s, where essentially they described it as an assembly line moving upwards into the sky, and they were each floor of the Empire State Building had a lot of similarities with the floor below, I'll have to sort of walk the floors and see if I can see that, but it was probably it was a very innovative idea at the beginning. So yeah, the key message out of that chapter or the introduction was sort of setting the stage that big projects can succeed, and he gives the example of the Nepalese school program, essentially building all the schools for an entire country in the mountains. Nepal is not a easy place to move around. It's very, very mountainous, very high altitude as well. So they can succeed, but there's an emphasis there on realistic planning, managing psychology and power dynamics, and adhering to an effective project execution principles. Okay, so that's the introduction. Then in sort of chapter 1, so that's the think slow and act fast. The record of big projects is even worse than it seems, but there is a solution. Speed up by slowing down. So he presents some data that is, very startling, essentially, and it's quite wonderful because it is data driven. It isn't simply ideas that people have a hunch of. It's truly data driven. So this chart, if you can see, it's not numbered. So the iron law of project management: over budget, over time, under benefits, over and over again. So it's costing more than we said it would, it's taking longer than we said it would, it's doing less than we said it would, and that just happens again and again. We and that's a very strong societal everybody we don't seem to learn. And with the bars there, so essentially 47.9% of projects are on budget or better. So that means essentially more than 50% are not on budget. And then 8.5% are on budget and on time. So then the reverse of that is essentially 90% or more than 90% are not on budget and not on time, or not on time. And then only 0.5% of projects are on budget, on time, and on benefits. So that's that project that did everything that it said it would do. So that is, incredibly rare. Incredibly rare. And I think people intuitively, if we talk about big infrastructure, when we read it in the news across any country, we essentially say it's not going to be done on time, it's going to cost more, and it isn't going to do everything that they initially started out to do. I think people have just built that into their mindsets, at least, I don't know, since the 60s. It's well known, but I think for any individual project, people work as if that isn't the case, and that their one will be the special one that is done on time, on budget, and will deliver everything. The scope remains the same. So that chart's based on the 16,000 projects in the database, which is quite amazing. And in chapter 1, where this idea of think slow and act fast is expanded upon, some case studies are presented where these didn't go well. So the Great Belt Project in Denmark, which was a bridge, road, rail, and tunneling combination, where one of the tunnels ended up becoming flooded with seawater as a result of the bridge builders or a dredging operation layering the legs that they put down onto the seafloor and puncturing through the tunnel below. Pretty bad. Fortunately, nobody died, because I think it would have been very probable given that challenge. Boston's Big Dig, very famous. If you know, Boston has a lot of underground motorways, highways, but they used to be above ground on elevation, and they were essentially tunnels were built, and those elevated highways were removed, and you have the parkland in so that downtown area. But that was a project with massive cost overruns and delays. And then the James Webb Telescope, so that's the one after Hubble, a very big telescope orbiting the Earth. I think it orbits the Earth. What is it? Is it stationary? I can't remember. Yeah, this was a project with very, very big delays and cost increases. And so the key message out of chapter 1 was investing the time in thorough planning before swiftly executing the project is incredibly well spent effort and money and time. And that by doing that, projects can avoid pitfalls and or at least lower the damage and sort of move hopefully into, well, let's try and grow that very small sliver of those on project on time and delivering all their benefits. Okay. Yes. And so rushing into the execution without proper planning leads to disastrous outcomes. Chapter 2, the commitment fallacy. So if think slow and act fast is the wise approach to big projects, why do so many people do the exact opposite? Because they rush to commit. You need to commit, but not in the way you think. So the key message I took from chapter 2 is that the premature commitment to a project is driven by several sort of psychological and human social interactions of strong optimism. And so sort of the Kahneman work around psychology is important here. Political pressures and sort of desire to act quickly for sort of getting things moving and doing things. And where really we need to, again, slow down and assess options and commit after conducting sort of thorough, open-minded planning and reviewing of various options. And 3 big examples are provided. So the Pentagon, the US DoD headquarters in sort of the Washington, D.C. area. This needed to be built quickly when the US hadn't entered World War II, but in that period where it was already happening in Europe and Asia, where essentially the general who was put in charge of building that rushed to select a site very, very quickly, and this site would have been quite disastrous in terms of the Pentagon wouldn't be a symmetrical shape. It would be a sort of misshapen Pentagon, and it would have destroyed the view from the cemeteries up on the hill that then overlook the Washington, D.C. Capitol. And it's actually kind of a unique project in that it sort of avoided the disaster, but only after the president, that'd be Roosevelt, had to tell the general in very clear terms while sat in the car that the project would be going to a different location. But if some other turn of history, that wouldn't have occurred, and they would have just gone ahead and built the thing. Heaven's Gate, which was a Wild West film that bankrupted United Arts. That's the name of the film production company. They essentially became one of the most expensive films in history, and it was very bad and didn't make its money back. Yeah, this was another example of essentially the director plowing ahead, filming a lot of stuff, building all these sets, such that it had committed a huge amount of money, committed to the certain picture, when it would have been better for the movie executive just to have killed the thing and moved on. And then finally, the Montreal Olympics, which were held in 1976, went 720% over budget. And not even everything was built for the Olympic event. They were still building it after the Olympics. And again, yeah, this was a sense of the mayor of Montreal was very, very keen on certain very high-tech and interesting designs, lots of new technology. If you know the Montreal Olympic Stadium famously was supposed to have a roof that could be open and closed based on the weather. I don't know if that works at all. Definitely didn't at the Olympics, and it was supposed to have a tower to hold up the roof, and that wasn't built for the Olympics. Okay, chapter 3, think from right to left. Projects are often started by jumping straight to the solution, even if a specific technology that's the wrong place to begin. You want to start by asking questions and considering alternatives at the outset, and always assume that there is more to learn. Start with the most basic question of all: why? So this, remember, we talked about the heuristics. Heuristic number 3 asks with why. So the key message around that in chapter 3 is that the project should start with a clear goal and a thorough understanding of the needs. So really zoom out and stop thinking about the solution and what are the needs that need to be achieved by the society or the individual client. And he provides 4 case studies where this has gone well or not so well. A kitchen renovation in New York City, so quite a small project, which essentially the scope kept increasing. So it started off with, let's renovate the kitchen, and then it became, they discovered that the floorboards were faulty and they had to be replaced. And once that happened, it was like, well, we might as well change the fireplace. And then once that's done, oh, well, might as well do this. So the scope just grows and grows and grows. Where if the people, the architect who had was supporting the homeowners had better conveyed what it was that they were actually after. If it was simply, we want a better kitchen, then they could have stuck to that and not done all this other stuff. Or if it was, we wanted to completely remodel our home, they could have also done that, and likely at much lower cost, because it would have been known up front that they were going to do all these things together. On a much more successful example would be the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, where Frank Gehry, the famous architect, is quoted a lot, where I mentioned earlier in this video, they had, he, on arrival to Bilbao, had been asked to renovate an existing building, but in zooming out and actually sort of moving much more to that right side of the project and asking, what is the purpose of this? And the purpose was to put the city on the map and increase tourism. Then it was made much more sense to build a brand new building that would be a complete landmark, as opposed to renovating an existing building that already has its design and wouldn't be that piece that people come to from all over the world. He then describes Robert Caro, who's a biographer, famous for the book on Robert Moses, which talks about Robert Moses was New York City civil servant who, and was he a politician? A civil servant in charge with a lot of infrastructure in New York City. But anyway, Caro writes these very, very long biographies. I think his President Johnson biography. It's like 5 volumes or something. But because he writes these massive biographies, which require vast amounts of research, he needs to be very, very clear on what the end goal is and what fits with that end goal. So by describing that clearly, it can make the process not get too tied up in all that nonsense, or get tied up in things that aren't important. And then Amazon, as in Amazon, the online retailer and technology company, Flyvbjerg describes their press release and FAQ, frequently asked questions process, where essentially at the start of a project, the advocate for the project writes the press release and the FAQ before the project's even started, before the product that's going to fulfill that has started, as a way of saying, well, this is what the end point's going to be. We're going to end up with this press release and frequently asked questions. Write that now, then we can work backwards through what technology and what project or program is needed to deliver that. Okay, so then chapter 4, Pixar planning, and that's Pixar like the film studio that makes the animated 3D films. Like Toy Story, I think, was their first and most famous. So people are terrible at getting things right the first time, but we are great at tinkering. Wise planners make the most of this basic insight into human nature. They try, learn, and do it again. They plan like Pixar and Frank Gehry do. Gehry, the architect. So the key message here is that planning is not just about getting things right the first time, and that's a sort of misconception of the sort of planning approaches sort of advocated in sort of big projects, be it sort of described in this book, How Big Things Get Done, or in the more academic books, so the Mega Projects and Risk book and the Oxford Handbook of Mega Project Management. So a fair amount of this chapter is dedicated to describing how Pixar and Gehry come to do their planning, which essentially involves a lot of experimentation, and a lot of that experimentation is in software or in low cost de-risking tools. So being with designing the Guggenheim Museum and other sort of Gehry buildings. A lot of it could be with paper and wooden blocks and those sort of architectural design models that you see architects make, or in he uses CATIA a lot. Sounds like that's been very, very powerful for him in making sort of that digital twin of the building before it's then actually built. Very, very different than what went on with the Sydney Opera House, where essentially they had some sketches and then ran straight ahead with pouring concrete and then having to demolish big chunks of it, and didn't even know how they were going to build certain those big sail-like concrete overlapping domes. And then a lot of description of Pixar's iterative process, where for Pixar films, they are essentially start off at just a small idea, and then that idea is sort of described in the form of storyboards, and then those storyboards are sort of animated into a rough film, and these are presented to colleagues within Pixar company and used to then modify the story again, and going through these sort of iteration loops. And the purpose of this is very cheap to do that versus filming an entire film, like went on with the other one that's quoted, the Heaven's Gate film, and then discovering it's no good. So which can be, tank the company. So it talks a lot about a maximum virtual product, and so how much can you do virtually ahead of the real thing, so that you can essentially de-risk a whole lot. And this is not dissimilar to the lean startup model that Eric Ries popularized with his book, where essentially you're gathering as much feedback as you can before, instead of sort of building a fully fledged system or building or software program. Instead, you're sort of incrementally designing things, and you're incrementally committing. Clearly, that's a bit different with say building an architecture, where at some you are very, very, very unlikely to build multiples of the same building and then demolish them if they don't work. But with modern software tools like Katia in Gary's example, but we could look at other tools. It is possible to do these things. Okay, so then chapter 5, are you experienced? Experience is invaluable, but too often it is overlooked or dismissed for other considerations, or it is simply misunderstood and marginalized. Here's how to avoid that. So from the database, it's clear that those projects that succeed have very, very experienced people who've done these projects again and again, and have built their experience on ever increasing difficulty. So experience can be individual, but also collective. So we might hear that the famous guy, that famous master builder, but they likely have a team that stays with them over multiple projects. This is described in with the Hoover Dam. That the chief engineer had built multiple dams in the western US around that time, and the Hoover Dam, which also was very, very successful, was just one of many that had been built before by him. But with essentially politics, it can be challenging to utilize the best experience. So if we think about a lot of major projects, major government paid for projects, it can be very challenging to not hire local firms, or for political reasons to situate work in politically important areas. So on that Danish Great Belt project, Flyvbjerg describes how his own father, who was in construction, when he heard that the tunneling was going to be done by a Danish construction contractor, he was not happy about this and thought it was a bad idea, because Denmark didn't have any experience in tunneling. And if you're going to do something that could be so risky, why leave it to people who haven't done that thing before? And likewise, there's a lot of comparisons again to the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, to the Sydney Opera House, in that Gary was 60 when he got the Guggenheim project, whereas the architect of the Sydney Opera House was in his 30s. And so Gary had incrementally built up his experience, whereas the other had not. California High-Speed Rail, that this was given to US contractors, and America doesn't have any high-speed rail currently, where likely, at least from a delivery perspective, things would have gone smoother if they'd involved some companies who had, and those would be foreign, and that would have political ramifications. I know a famous one with some Canadian icebreakers, where Canada, the Canadian government wanted these icebreakers to these big ships that smash up the ice, so that then more conventional ships can pass through a channel, where all the ice has been moved out the way. Canadian industry didn't have any experience in doing this, but for political reasons they had to be built in Canada, and additionally, for political reasons, one was to be built in British Columbia and the other was to be built in Quebec. So even that individual shipyard, which could have gained the experience of building the first one and then the second one, that was denied again for political reasons. But then on a more positive note, the Empire State Building was an example of multiple sort of experience being used in a positive way, in that the team that the architect and the construction company had already built a series of skyscrapers, one in North Carolina, which has a very similar design, if much smaller, to the Empire State Building, and additionally each floor was deliberately made to be very similar. Therefore, sort of experience from one floor could be applied to the one above. And then sadly, the Olympics is what Flyvbjerg characterizes as eternal beginner syndrome, in that as we know, the Olympics moves around the world, so countries that have hosted the Olympics multiple times, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, so I think like Tokyo, Japan, Los Angeles, California, Paris, France, London in the United Kingdom. So these countries are some of the few that have hosted it multiple times, but between each time is maybe 50 years. So you won't have any experience transfer over that period. And additionally, it's very important to, these are things of national pride, and hence why in the table in the appendix, I find it very interesting that let's get this. The Olympic Games is ranked number 2 in the mean cost overrun, second only to nuclear storage, but above nuclear power. And you think about this, nuclear Olympic Games, the ancient Greeks could hold this. Like at the end of the day, it's people watching other people do sports over a 2-3 week period, and yet this is the type of project that goes massively overrun, much more than aircraft or oil pipelines and railway lines and things of that nature, which are technically contain a lot more technology than the Olympic Games. And so I'm making a few extrapolations here, but it seems to me that experience gap, or as Flyvbjerg calls it, the eternal beginner syndrome of Olympic planning, is coming to bear there. That's very interesting. Okay, chapter 6. So you think your project is unique? Think again. Understanding that your project is one of those is key to getting your forecast right and managing your risks. Okay, so what's this all about? So it's, and this is coming back to those cognitive biases that has been spoken about before. It seems likely that humans want to put their project as this unique special thing, which it is, but it can be classified amongst others, and that's very, very powerful when it comes to forecasting. So Flyvbjerg developed a reference class forecasting approach, which is essentially based on gathering up data of similar projects and use that to essentially forecast how long your project will last in terms of its budget and time. And why that works is because it's likely your project is not any different than those other ones. And so the example he uses is one that he worked on. So the Hong Kong XRL project. So this is the railway line, underground high-speed railway line that goes from Hong Kong to Shenzhen and maybe up to Guangzhou. So you have Hong Kong, and then you have the border to mainland China. Shenzhen is right on that border, and then Guangzhou is up to the north, and that sort of whole Pearl River Delta with Macau over the water on the west. Anyway, this was to be the world's first fully underground high-speed rail system. And when Flyvbjerg was contacted, they were running late and over budget. And part of this was that they had used their own, this is the Hong Kong Railway Authority, used their own experience in slow, more conventional railway, slow, not high speed, and used that to make their forecasts. However, this wasn't what was appropriate for high speed rail, and so using Flyvbjerg's database, they were able to predict the project would actually take 6 years, as opposed to the 4 that was in the original estimate, and thus the fact that they were overrunning was sort of to be expected once the forecast had been done on an appropriate reference examples or similar ones. Again, with Robert Caro's book, so this is the autobiographer. He was feeling a lot of pressure to get his book done in 1 year, and as journalist, he essentially scaled up writing a newspaper article or magazine article per week, and then sort of scaled that to book size and said, okay, well then it would mean it would take 1 year to write a book. Until then he met with several other biographers, and they said that these things take more like 7 years, 10 years, things of that nature. And that's sort of what Caro's book came out of. So this reference class forecasting method has been found to be much more successful in providing accurate estimates, and was essentially developed when Flyvbjerg was engaged by 10 Downing Street. Okay, so then chapter 7, can ignorance be your friend? Planning ruins projects, some say. Just get going. Trust your creativity. It's a wonderful sentiment backed by superb stories, but is it true? Now, I think this is pushing back in the sense that there'll be a fair few who would say, well, we won't know what we want to do until we start to build it, and we should just plow ahead and let our creativity happen, and we'll develop something that's even better than what could be planned before. Okay, so that's Flyvbjerg essentially disagrees with that and sort of has his proof as to why. So the idea that planning can ruin projects and that creativity thrives best when people leap into projects without overthinking is appealing, but is often misguided. And it's often appealing on like a story narrative level, as opposed to in a sort of data-driven approach, which is much more appropriate for having higher likelihood of succeeding. So the examples he provides are Jimi Hendrix's Electric Lady Studio that was developed in the 60s, which had very, very bad planning, and was done in a sort of ad hoc way, but did end up working out and is very successful as a recording studio. And he also talks about the creation of the Jaws film, which again went very badly wrong in terms of production, but was a blockbuster success and made back all its money well beyond, and made Steven Spielberg into a very successful, famous film director. And the Sydney Opera House, again, it had massive underestimating of cost and time, but it's become iconic. But sadly, all of these sort of fall into a sort of survivorship bias, in that because all three of those, it worked out and went well. We know of them, but we don't know of, especially in sort of filmmaking, there must be phenomenal number of films that went well over budget and didn't do well, and we've never heard of them. And Albert Hirschman's book, 1967 book, Development Projects Observed, is sort of, and it is an older book, 67, but this is where Hirschman's sort of hiding hand theory is presented, suggesting that ignorance of difficulties leads to creative solutions and the project's success. And, well, Flyvbjerg's research and data analysis shows that that's very rare, and you shouldn't, if you want to maximize the likelihood of a good outcome, you shouldn't apply that approach. Okay, chapter 8, the single determined organism. As important as it is to do the slow thinking that produces excellent planning and forecasting, acting fast in delivery more than a strong plan, you need an equally strong team. How are diverse people and organizations with different identities and interests turned into a single us, a team, with everyone rowing in the same direction towards delivering? The key takeaway of this is that building a successful project requires more than a plan. It requires a team that's united, committed, and empowered as this sort of single organism to a determined outcome. This determined organism with determined outcome. The examples given, 3, Hoover Dam, Heathrow Terminal 5, and Wembley Stadium. So Hoover Dam, this came in under budget, ahead of schedule, and Frank Crowe, who was the lead engineer who ran it, he himself was very experienced and built multiple dams, and that his team would travel with him to develop these multiple dams. So he had a very experienced team. Terminal 5, again, delivered on time and on budget, with a very, very strong team culture. So in the book, he talks a lot about how, in his interviews with the various managers and leaders of the program, how everyone would be wearing their branded uniforms of Terminal 5, almost like they were a football team merchandise, and that everyone who worked on it has never been on a building site like it before, in that it was just very, very focused on delivering the outcome and ensuring that everybody was rowing in that same direction and respected, and work and risk sharing was done in such that all of the different contractors were highly aligned to deliver the final building, which is more than a building. Remember, an airport terminal is a system of safety, a system of providing nourishment. It's got the baggage handling, roads, rail. It's essentially like a city in a box. Even has hotels. And then this is contrasted with Wembley Stadium, where you think so. Wembley Stadium, it's on the same side of London as Heathrow, and the national football team of England's home stadium. So a place which you think would have strong commitment to do well and do a good job, but this was plagued with very poor teamwork and conflicts and delays. So the takeaway from this idea is that to create that single determined organism requires upfront effort and ongoing effort, and it won't just occur sort of emergently through luck. Okay, chapter 9, what is your Lego? So chapter 9 is a bit different than the others, whereas the others are perhaps have a bias to avoiding things going wrong. Chapter 9, I feel, is very sort of solution orientated, with essentially a description of modularity and how modularity has been shown to be a key factor in successful projects and programs, and thus is likely a very important factor that should be applied to your own work. So chapter 9, what is your Lego? Get a small thing, a basic building block. Combine it with another and another until you have what you need. That's how a single solar cell becomes a solar panel, which becomes a solar array, which becomes a massive megawatt churning solar farm. Modularity delivers faster, cheaper, and better, making it valuable for all your project types and sizes. But for building a truly huge scale, the scale that transforms cities, countries, and even the world, modularity is not just valuable, it is indispensable. So the central argument he provides is that modularity, or building large projects from many small recomposable components, repeatable components like Lego blocks being sort of the archetype of this, but have in your mind server racks, solar panels, as he's mentioned. This is essential for building projects quickly, cheaply, and reliably, and is indispensable. So the examples he provides as a problematic, highly non-modular system was a nuclear power plant in Japan called Monju, which started construction, I think, in the 80s, and was officially essentially started to be demolished in the 2000s, in the 2010s, and never generated any electricity. And nuclear power, or conventional nuclear power, is sort of seen as an example of a highly non-modular system, in that I mentioned at the beginning of this video how for a nuclear power station you need to have the entire thing fully built and integrated and working before you can generate any electricity, and hence any return and benefits from the system. Whereas with solar power, each individual panel, once installed, is generating electricity, and we can simply add more of them to generate more and more power. So yeah, Monju as is provided as an example of where this has gone wrong, and then examples where modularization and modularity has gone very well was that Nepal school program mentioned right at the beginning in the introduction. Tesla Gigafactory, we know the famous one in the Nevada desert. At first you'd say, well, that's a big single entity, but actually the Gigafactory has been built is essentially multiple factories in a building, and thus the first battery cells were being manufactured and delivered before the entire building was built, because it has multiple stages within it. The Madrid Metro, which was expanded in the 90s, early 2000s, they had modular stations and also modular tunnels, and so each tunnels, it was determined the amount of tunneling that could be done by a boring machine and the crew over a given period of time, and then all of the tunnels were divided up into these modules, and so they could predict very carefully how much of the subway they could be building per month, essentially. And they were able to double the speed and half the cost of subway expansion. And it'd be interesting to dig into that to see if other cities have been able to replicate that. Containerization, so we know big containers used to move goods around the world on ship and then off directly onto rail or truck. I mean, this has had a massive impact in the expansion of global trade. And then wind power. So wind power, again, is highly modular in that a single wind turbine, so that's pole with its blades, and so a spinning generator. Each individual wind turbine is generating electricity, and we just add more and more and more before we end up with a whole farm. But we don't need to wait for the whole farm to be generating electricity. And that in Denmark, this has really transformed its energy industry. Now, there are a couple of charts. There aren't that many charts in the whole book, but there are some in chapter 9, which are very interesting as well. Let's get this. So, essentially, here is again very small. The rows are different project class, and the moving to the left are the very thin tails. So these are the projects that don't have these big risks of massive overruns, and these are the ones that are highly modular. So these are solar, wind power, thermal energy, and energy transmission. So these are all things that are essentially made in factories and then moved to the installation site and assembled and are done with as modules. Whereas nuclear storage, Olympics, nuclear power, these are those big fat tails, which we think as being highly not modular, at least not modular currently. And as a counter to some arguments with regard to big, highly integrated systems like those nuclear power stations, Flyvbjerg does acknowledge that some mention that this is likely a challenge of regulation and NIMBYism and things where if we had regulatory environments that were less overbearing, things could be better. And so he does compare it to in China, where in China essentially I don't know enough about Chinese energy politics, but I suspect it's less problematic to there's less local opposition that's listened to with regard to, say, building a nuclear power station. But even there, where if that's taken as a given, the newly installed capacity of solar and wind is massively outpacing that of nuclear. And that's the other chart that he has in there, which is, let's see this. Okay. So, yeah, that's been a sort of run through of those various chapters. There's that key table in the appendix, which I think, if you're interested in these big projects and things like that, I'd get the book just for that table. Like, it's really, really powerful. Plus, these huge numbers of references at the end. I mean, which are worth following up on and reading through, because again, you really will learn a lot from all of that. In terms of the style, so as I said, it is very accessible. A lot of examples are provided, but there's a very strong foundation in rigorous research based off of that database of projects. Overall, like if I just run through the examples that are used in the book, yeah, I mean, how many is that? I think I'm counting something like, maybe it's up to 30. I don't know, I've got like 2 full A4 pages of examples I could count. So we've got Californian high-speed rail, the Nepal School Project, the Empire State Building, the Great Belt Project in Denmark, Boston's Big Dig, NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, the Pentagon, Heaven's Gate film, the Montreal Olympics of 1976, the kitchen renovation in New York City, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, Amazon's press release and FAQ process, Robert Caro's writing process, so that was that biographer famous for Robert Moses and President Johnson biographies, Sydney Opera House in Australia, Pixar's innovative sort of process for de-risking films and improving them. The lean startup model is described, so that's Eric Ries's, and the maximum virtual product and that's sort of a play on, I think it's Lean Startup, where they talk a lot about the minimum viable product. Canadian icebreakers, I haven't spoken about this, I think, in today's video, but the Seattle, in Seattle, they moved a above ground road into an underground tunnel, so that's in here. The Hong Kong XRL high-speed rail, underground high-speed rail, Chicago Fire Festival, HS2, which is another high-speed rail in the UK using RCF, reference class forecasting, Electric Lady Studios, that's Jimi Hendrix music studio, Hirschman's sort of book, and the examples out of that, be it, Jaws, the film, Wembley Stadium in London, Terminal 5 at Heathrow Airport, the Hoover Dam, Monju's nuclear power plant in Japan. Some modular construction in England, particularly with school costs being reduced in third, Tesla Gigafactory, SpaceX, the Madrid metro expansion, Madrid, Spain, Chinese energy, be it wind, solar, and nuclear, Danish wind, and then SMR, small modular reactors. So these are the nuclear industry recognizing that modularization would be highly beneficial, likely, for their industry, and they could avoid some of these downsides. There is a push to build nuclear reactors essentially in a factory that are then assembled on site. So rather than having a nuclear power station that maybe has 1 or 2 reactors, you could, for the same generating capacity, have multiple reactors in that same facility, or you could have facilities that are spread more widely over the planet. Okay, so yeah, I mean, that's been a description of a lot of the chapters and the individual examples within them. I think sort of, if I was going to say, what are the big important ideas from the book, outside of those heuristics, which I think they're very good, and using that table to sort of reference class forecast your own work, I think sort of like number one, sort of important ideas in the book: think slow, act fast. The importance of thorough and deliberate planning before executing a project quickly and effectively to minimize the risks and ensure success. I would caveat that you don't want to end up in a situation of sort of analysis paralysis, but it seems likely, well, there's the research behind it, and I stress, that I've only got 3 books here, but there's vast numbers of papers and things, that not enough, that the thinking is too fast and the acting is too slow in big programs, and that we need to change that. So think slow and act fast. And to be able to act fast, you likely need to have thought slow. You need to have thought extensively and in depth. And that doesn't mean creating documents and things that are not actually leading to a deep analysis. It is possible to give a surface level impression that deep thought has been given, and instead you're just sort of creating documentation for documentation's sake. Okay, so another idea I pulled out as number 2 was this idea of modularity, building large projects by assembling smaller repeatable units or modules like Lego bricks, which allows for faster, cheaper, and more scalable project delivery. I think on absolute terms that's true, but also just being more predictable. And I think often at times being predictable is often even more benefit than being absolutely, say, cheaper. Number 10 on my important ideas from the book, reference class forecasting, using data from similar projects to make more accurate forecasts and manage the risks effectively, rather than relying solely on the specifics of your current project. And just to sort of expand on that would mean if you're trying to do something, find as much data as you can on comparable things or as close as you can to those things, and essentially you maybe take the mean of that, or take the mean of the tail risk, or apply some statistics to that, as opposed to essentially from a bottom-up perspective, add together the various components as you know of them, and come up with your estimate, because that is one way, but essentially you're not accounting for your unknown unknowns and all of that uncertainty that you're unaware of, particularly if you're not a master builder by experience. As that comes on to number 4 of the important ideas from the book, so the idea of this master builder. So the concept of hiring or becoming a master builder as a sort of highly experienced individual with that deep domain experience. So he talks about how a Canadian hydroelectric dam project went very badly because not necessarily because, but those who are in place to run it were all from oil and gas. And one might say, well, that's another sort of comparable big infrastructure project. But at least in that case, they would have been better off to have hired those who had expertise in hydroelectric dams. And then off of that concept of number 4 of master builder was Phronesis, which was that word from ancient Greece that Aristotle was using, a word for wisdom or intelligence concerned with practical action. Okay, and then number 5 from the 10 most important ideas from the book that I come up with was commitment fallacy. So recognizing the danger of continuing to invest in failing projects due to sunk costs and psychological commitment to seeing them through instead of reassessing and potentially just stopping. And we know that High Speed 2 in Britain has, well, at least had its scope massively reduced. Whether that class is sort of stopping, not sure. But there were many projects which might have been better off to have just stopped. Another concept that I haven't touched on in this video so far was experi. I can't pronounce that quite right. This is Latin, expiriri, EXPERIRI, which is a combination of experimentation and experience. So it's a concept of sort of the value of combining experimentation with practical experience to refine project plans and mitigate risks before full-scale execution. So it's mentioned a lot by Flyvbjerg around Frank Gehry's approach with playing with designs, using CATIA, using paper models, things like that, to uncover challenges and in the planning process, as opposed to discovering them in real life. Those challenges will be discovered, but you want to discover them when you're actually building the thing, and it's going to be a lot more expensive to deal with. Whereas if you could discover them in planning, that would be preferable. Okay, number 10 on the important ideas, team dynamics and having that, I'll use his precise term, the single determined organism, sort of making it very, having that team and that wide team, and this team could be thousands of people that are all focused on that, delivering that same objective and working together to do that, and crafting the various incentives such that everyone is incentivized to do that. Okay, then the outside view. So number 8 on the important ideas. So the practice of stepping away from the project and its sort of unique details, and observing it as a class among others, and this sort of feeds into that reference class forecasting I've spoken about. Okay, risk mitigation and fat tail risks. So what is very interesting about the table, well, one aspect is so then the final column of the table of project types is the mean overrun of projects in the tail. And so the definition of a project in the tail is a project that with a greater than 50% overrun. So your project is already overrun by more than 50%. So in the tail. And so what is the mean overrun of those projects? And these can be very scary numbers. And the largest one is in IT of 447% overrun, mean overrun of projects in the tail. And so throughout the book, Flyvbjerg talks about sort of cutting off the tail and doing risk mitigation activities to do that. Seems that modularity is the most important one. I mean, how you can do that in IT is perhaps sort of more challenging, in that especially these types of IT projects that likely go on massive overruns, I suspect are very all-encompassing to the whole organization. Like think the NHS IT system that had big problems, or the US healthcare insurance system that again had similar ones. And then Flyvbjerg raises sort of climate mitigation and building out infrastructure to support sustainable energy consumption transition as being very, very important. Okay, so that's been the 10 important ideas from the book. Now, lost my place. Okay, so yeah, I think this is a good book for anybody who is interested in how to achieve things that require essentially fair amount of resources. I'm hedging my wording because I think it could be easy to get caught up in sort of thinking about big railway lines and oil pipelines and sports stadiums, but it does, clearly say on the cover the surprising factors behind every successful project, from home renovations to space exploration. And so you could be applying this to much more small and sort of simple things, as well as those with which are much more sort of wide scale and have significant societal impact. It's definitely written in a way that could be consumed by anyone, but it does have very strong academic research credentials, which is certainly not a given in many books of this nature. At some point we can do sort of more of a discussion into the deeper stuff. I think that would be good. And I think it could be good to do a discussion on some of the actual individual case studies, especially the Pentagon. That could be interesting. So I think it's very important that when we work, that we try to avoid this iron law of mega projects, which is sadly, let's go back to that diagram. This one. Sadly, over budget, over time, under benefits, over and over again is the norm. It's been proven by all of this data, and that only 0.5% are on budget, on time, and on benefits or better. So that's a massive opportunity to improve things. Towards the end of the book, he talks about how such even small improvements of project delivery would have such massive freeing ups of money in the economy, and we can also think of all those benefits that would be brought back to people, like for example, if we're sat in a traffic jam, building more capacity, be it of transport in general, would mean that we could move more people to more of their destinations that they want to do, and evidently a whole class of challenges that human society is dealing with are essentially to be improved by better project delivery. So strong recommendation. In the below there'll be links to my notes that you can get, but you should definitely go and read the book, and you can listen to it as well on audiobook from Audible and all the rest, and it's the type of book that you can listen to. It's not punctuated too much with diagrams and things like that, but you should buy it as well so you can look at the diagrams. Okay, so let me know how this has been helpful, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.